When you think of horror anthologies, chances are the first title that crawls out of the coffin and waves at you is Creepshow. Released in 1982, directed by George A. Romero, written by Stephen King, and styled like a garish comic book come to life, this film was never meant to be subtle. It's loud, it's campy, it's gruesome, and it revels in the kind of over-the-top pulp storytelling that would make a Tales from the Crypt ghoul squeal with joy. It's also a film that has aged into cult royalty. Watch it today and you'll see the neon lighting, the hammy acting, the comic panel transitions, and you'll either think this is genius or this is ridiculous. The truth is, it's both. So let's jump into each of the stories, the demented minds who brought them to life, the film's box office fortunes, the sequels and spin-offs, and why Creepshow continues to crawl through horror history like a cockroach that refuses to die. The anthology kicks off with a family gathering that could have been lifted from a particularly toxic episode of Succession. The Granthams are a wealthy clan dripping with entitlement, snark, and just enough dysfunction to make you glad you're not invited to dinner. Into this mix comes Bedelia, the bitter daughter who once murdered her father after years of his abuse. Dad was a tyrant, a man so obnoxious and cruel that his one defining trait was demanding his Father's Day cake. Seriously, that's the hill he chose to die on. Cake. Of course, because this is Creepshow, he doesn't stay dead. Many years later, his mouldy half-skeletal corpse claws its way out of the grave, still demanding his cake. It's a ludicrous premise, the world's first pastry-based haunting. But Romero shoots it with all the lurid comic book style in the world. The neon red lighting, the tilted camera angles, the grotesque close-ups. It's a perfect open. Short, mean-spirited, and topped with one of the best punchlines in anthology history. A severed head presented like a dessert, complete with frosting and candles. It's disgusting. It's hilarious. It's Creepshow. If Father's Day is grotesque comedy, Jordy Verrill is slapstick tragedy. And who better to star in it than Stephen King himself, apparently channeling every Saturday morning cartoon yokel rolled into one. Jordy is a backwoods bumpkin who discovers a glowing meteorite in his yard. Naturally, instead of calling the authorities, he pokes it, repeatedly. His scientific method is basically touch it, then lick it. The meteorite leaks some kind of alien planet goo, and before long, Jordy is sprouting weeds all over his body. His home turns into a greenhouse nightmare. King plays a role with such cartoonish gusto that it feels like a live-action Looney Tunes sketch, except instead of chasing Roadrunner, the coyote is slowly turning into turf. By the end, Jordy has become a full-on moss monster, begging for death in the most pitiful way possible. It's horrifying, yes, but also weirdly sad. A man undone by his own stupidity and some space algae. If nothing else, it's proof that Stephen King may be the master of horror writing, but as an actor, well, let's just say no one was calling him the next Daniel Day-Lewis. Now here's where Creepshow delivers one of its nastiest tales. Enter Leslie Nielsen, pre-Naked Gun, pre-comedy legend in one of his rare straight villain roles. And he's terrifying. He plays Richard Vickers, a wealthy psychopath who discovers his wife has been cheating on him with a younger man, played by Ted Danson. Instead of, filing for divorce like a sane human, Nielsen goes full Bond villain. He lures Danson to his beach house, forces him at gunpoint to bury himself in the sand, and sets up a TV so he can watch his wife go through the same fate. Then he leaves them both to drown as the tide comes in. It's chilling. Nielsen's calm delivery makes him scarier than if he had ranted and raved. He doesn't just want revenge, he wants to savor it like a fine wine. Of course, in true Creepshow fashion, Danson and his lover return from the grave as bloated seaweed-draped zombies, giving Nielsen the kind of iconic payback the EC Comics specialized in. By the end, Nielsen is the one gasping for air, trapped in his own personal drowning chamber. The segment is cruel, efficient, and a masterclass in grim irony. Also, it makes you terrified of ever going to the beach again. The crown jewel of the film. The Crate is where Romero and King cut loose, giving us a story that's equal parts monster movie, dark comedy, and cathartic fantasy. The premise: a janitor discovers a mysterious wooden crate hidden beneath a university staircase. The crate dates back to the 1800s, and inside it lives a monster that looks like Cookie Monster's evil twin after a decade on bath salts. This creature doesn't just kill, it tears people apart with relish, leaving blood and body parts scattered like confetti. Enter Henry Northrop, a meek professor with an overbearing wife, Wilma, played by Adrienne Barbeau in full shrill, boozy glory. She's loud, obnoxious, cruel, basically every stereotype of a nagging wife dialed to 11. Henry sees the crate not as a curse, but as an opportunity. He hatches a plan to lure Wilma to it, and sure enough, the monster does what Henry could never do himself. The result is gruesome, hilarious, and oddly cathartic. Audiences reportedly cheered in theaters when Wilma got eaten. This segment alone could have been its own movie. It's gory, suspenseful, and Romero's direction is at its best here, balancing tension with absurd humor. If you remember only one Creepshow story, chances are it's The Crate. The finale is as simple as it is skin-crawling. E.G. Marshall plays Upson Pratt, a wealthy germophobic businessman who has locked himself away in a sterile white penthouse. He's the kind of villain you love to hate. Arrogant, cruel, and completely disconnected from the suffering of the outside world. His punishment comes in the form of cockroaches. Thousands of them. First a few, then dozens, then an avalanche. They swarm through his apartment, into his food, into his bed, and finally, into his body. And here's the kicker. Those weren't fake bugs. The production used real cockroaches. Hundreds of thousands of them. Entire rooms filled with live insects. The actors and crew were traumatized. Romero, in his infinite wisdom, decided that nothing could beat the horror of real bugs. And he was right. Watching this segment is like a slow descent into madness. you can practically feel the roaches crawling on your skin. By the final grotesque reveal, Pratt's corpse splitting open to release a tidal wave of insects, it's safe to say most viewers were reaching for the nearest can of Raid. In Creepshow, the movie frames its 5 anthology tales with the story of a young boy and his overbearing father. The opening sets the stage. The boy, Billy, played by Joe King, Stephen King's own son, is gleefully reading his beloved Creepshow horror comic book. His father, played with furious dad energy by Tom Atkins, thinks the comic is trash, garbage in, garbage out, and berates Billy for wasting his mind on such filth. He even throws the comic into the trash, setting up the revenge that comes later. As Billy sulks in his room, we get our first glimpse of the Creep, a ghoulish figure at his window, ushering us into the comic's stories. The ending circles back after the anthology's 5 grisly tales. The trash collectors find the discarded comic and notice an ad for a voodoo doll, but that page is missing. Cut back to Billy's home. His father suddenly clutches his throat, choking and in agony. Upstairs, Billy is happily jabbing away at his new voodoo doll, complete with his father's hair attached. The abusive dad gets his comeuppance, and Billy gets the last laugh, grinning like a maniac while the screen freezes. It's a neat wraparound that not only ties the comic book theme together, but also delivers the twisted EC Comics style poetic justice. Kids will inherit the earth, provided they have access to mail-order occult paraphernalia. At the helm was George A. Romero. Already legendary for Night of the Living Dead, Romero had always been an experimental filmmaker, and with Creepshow he brought his love of comic books to the big screen. He filmed the film with exaggerated lighting, split-screen transitions, and comic panel wipes. Every frame looks like it could be ripped from a lurid pulp magazine. Romero didn't just make a horror film, he made a love letter to the comics he grew up with. The writer, of course, was Stephen King. At this point, King was already a best-selling author, but this was his first original screenplay. He poured his affection for EC Comics into the script, filling it with ironic twists and grisly humour. Unlike many of his buck-to-film adaptations, which Hollywood frequently butchered, Creepshow remained pure to King. Unfiltered, over the top, and proudly pulpy. The collaboration between Romero and King was like peanut butter meeting jelly. Sticky, messy, and weirdly perfect. Made on an $8 million budget, Creepshow grossed $21 million in the US alone. For a horror anthology in the early 80s, that was a big win. It didn't reach slasher level profits like Friday the 13th, but it cemented itself as a commercial success. Critics were split. Some loved its campy throwback style, others dismissed it as cartoonish trash. But audiences embraced it, especially horror fans hungry for something different. Over the years, those box office numbers would pale in comparison to its cult status on VHS, where Creepshow became a staple of late-night rentals. Today, Creepshow is considered one of the greatest horror anthologies ever made. Its comic book style influenced countless filmmakers, from Tales to the Dark Side to Michael Dougherty's Trick or Treat. It showed that horror could be funny without losing its edge. And it reminded audiences that sometimes the scariest stories are the ones with a punchline. It also gave us one of the most iconic horror mascots, the Creep, the robed skeletal figure who introduces each tale with a sinister grin. He became as recognizable as Freddy or Jason to horror fans, popping up in posters, trailers, and eventually as the host of the TV spin-off. Of course, success breeds sequels, and Creepshow was no exception. Creepshow 2 continued the format, this time with 3 stories instead of 5. While the budget was smaller, it still delivered memorable tales, especially The Raft, where a group of teens are trapped on a lake with a sentient oil slick. Creepshow 3. Well, we don't talk about Creepshow 3. Made without Romero or King, it's widely regarded as one of the worst horror sequels ever inflicted on mankind. Watching it feels like punishment for enjoying the first 2 films. More recently, the franchise was resurrected on Shudder as a TV anthology series, starting in 2019. To everyone's surprise, it was actually good. The Creeper returned as host, and new stories captured that same comic book energy that made the original work. Proof that some franchises refuse to die, even if they should have been buried. At the end of the day, Creepshow is more than just a movie. It's a carnival of gore, humour and nostalgia. It's Romero and King tipping their hats to the comics that scared and delighted them as kids. It's a reminder that horror doesn't always need to be subtle or psychological. Sometimes it can be loud, garish, and unapologetically silly. Watching Creepshow today, you'll laugh, you'll squirm, and you'll probably look twice at any crates sitting under stairwells. It's a perfect Halloween movie, not just because it's scary, but because it's fun. And in the end, isn't that what Halloween is all about? So after all the blood, gore, and a creature that looks like a demonic muppet on steroids, the real horror would be forgetting to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't risk it. The crate opens for non-subscribers first.